So the subject for tonight's meeting is going to be AWS Amplify. And go ahead and start this. Hey, welcome. So as I was just mentioning before, we're always looking for speakers. So if anybody has something they'd like to present on or speak about, please contact me and we'll get you on the schedule for the next meeting or potential, maybe you may not be ready to do one for like 3 months down the road. We'll get you on the schedule for 3 months down the road. So just a quick, a little bit about me for the people that don't know who I am. I have a blog where I kind of blog about this stuff. I also have a YouTube channel. It's called the Polyglot Engineer, where I also talk about this stuff. Also, most of the stuff that I talk about, I also will put repos up on my GitHub page. So if you want to look at the source code and stuff like that, I have everything that I've ever presented on is pretty much on my GitHub page. And I also you can't say tweet anymore, post on X, either with the JaxNode handle, which is usually stuff that's geared around the user group, and then stuff that's just more tech in general. I use the Polyglot Engine 1 handle for that. All right. So I don't know about some of you, but when we were just talking about the magic and wonders of using floppy disks. And so the first company I remember I worked at, we didn't even have anything this sophisticated. We had, literally like servers that were sitting on the floor. The first company I worked for in Jacksonville, like when they did their first web app, they literally put it like on a big desktop machine on a desk. And they just had the domain name pointing to the IP address for that machine. There was a lot of kind of figure it out as you go type thing. And so I was fortunate enough at a couple of companies I've worked at, I actually got to build data centers for the company. And so where we put in raised floors, we had, all the cabling running underneath the floor. We had all the fire suppression, all the cooling stuff. And what I've pretty much found at all the different places that I've worked at or I've done consulting for is that it's almost impossible to do everything right as far as like running and managing a data center. And so, one of the things that I first started noticing not that long ago was that, there's a lot of companies that are essentially co-location facilities. And 1 second. Admit. Excuse me 1 second here. Let me go back. Because was trying to get back in. All right. So let me come back here. So one of the things I noticed was that one of the things that companies started doing is they started offering co-location services where you could take your rack mountable servers and stuff like that. You could bring them to this business. You could put the rack mount in, and then they essentially would operate the data center. They had all the security set up. A lot of times biometric security where you had to use a fingerprint or a retina scan or whatever if you wanted somebody to get in there. They had all the battery backup and diesel generator backup so that if you lost power, like during a storm, you could at least keep the data center going. And so that started to become kind of the norm. I want to say maybe about 20 years ago, the co-location facilities started becoming a lot more popular rather than do that. But the last .NET job I had, we actually had a data center in our on the 9th floor of our office where I worked. And we still were doing co-location, but we did have a number of things that we were still running, like our dev servers, as an example, we're running, on the 9th floor. There's no reason to have that in a data center. But the next thing was, I'd say probably about 16 years ago, AWS started offering, cloud services. I think it started off with S3, where you could essentially, you could store your files basically on their cloud. And then they started offering like VM services. And not too long after that, Microsoft started offering the same services with Azure. So these cloud providers and started becoming more common and offering more services. And then the next trend was then you started seeing kind of hybrid, where you could have companies and stuff that were offering hybrid services where you can run, you might have an on-premises type of a data center, but then you could share resources with essentially the cloud-based providers. So that kind of brings us to the cloud. I just got a picture of some clouds here. So now I think if somebody's starting up a company or they're trying to start a new project, I think usually people will try to, their first choice is to go to the cloud versus to try to host stuff themselves. And that's really kind of the smart thing, because all the backups, all of the security, everything else is basically baked in with these services. So one of the advantages is the lease don't own. So I actually kind of like that one, because there's that famous story of the CTO of Netflix was doing a speech somewhere, and somebody, he was talking about how they used for their video servers, they used these flash drives as opposed to using or flash memory based drives rather than using spinning disks. And somebody got up and asked him a question. It's like, well, what about the failure rate? Those have a much higher failure rate, and you're kind of basing your business on hardware that could fail easily. And he was like, "That's not my problem. I don't own it. It's AWS actually owns the drive. So if it fails, it's on them to replace it and fix it." So that's one of the advantages with cloud-based hosting. Another common one is it's a lot easier to scale up. So if you build something and it's popular, and then all of a sudden, you need additional capacity, it's a lot easier to scale up with cloud-based service, unless of course you're using an AI-based server. Right now, that might be a problem. And so you gain from the infrastructure of the cloud-based host. And so, you can write an application and deploy it, but then you can start using all the different, resources and stuff that are available. And so, those are some of the advantages. And so the people that still have, the need to, run some stuff, in an on-prem type of environment, there are hosting providers that offer those services as well. But I know at the company I'm working at now, it's like we do all of our hosting on Azure. We're doing all of our hosting on Azure. So I started learning about Amplify and stuff before I started this new job. And so I was like, oh, maybe the next job I'll be able to apply this to the next job. And then of course, the company I'm working for is a Microsoft partner. So we're doing everything on Azure there. So those are some of the advantages with doing a cloud-based hosting. So some of the hosts that are available, I already mentioned Azure and AWS. Google also offers some pretty good cloud services. IBM bought Red Hat, and Red Hat has a pretty popular Kubernetes-based hosting service. Oracle has got into it. I believe that TikTok is hosting everything on Oracle's cloud. But the biggest player is AWS. AWS, I think, has the highest market share. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but the next closest one is Microsoft with Azure. And there's also a lot of other like smaller hosts. Like I host some stuff on Ocean. DigitalOcean, yeah. And then there's other providers like Heroku and PlanetScale and Vercel. But the interesting thing about, I'm not sure about PlanetScale, but Heroku and Vercel are actually both running on AWS. So like the nice thing about those services, it makes it very easy to, create your application, containerize your application and deploy it, but it's actually just being deployed onto AWS. Heroku is interesting because they're owned by Salesforce. And Salesforce does a lot of stuff. They do host a lot of stuff on AWS, but they also use Azure for some of their stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting choice there. And there's cost differences as well. There's actually ways that you can deploy stuff on Vercel and spend a lot more money on Vercel than you would if you were doing on AWS, but you can also, they have some stuff that actually winds up coming in being less expensive. Welcome, come on in. So AWS has a lot of different ways that you can host things on AWS. You have the ability to spin up your own VM and do stuff. That was my first experience with hosting stuff on AWS, was just spinning up a virtual machine and deploying code to it. You can also just use S3 storage. A lot of people will take like a static website, for example, and upload it to a bucket, and then they can point a domain to that and actually host a static website that way. And you shouldn't have any scaling problems if you get slash dotted, or you have a website that gets slash dotted or whatever. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it going down. One of the services they have that I like a lot is Lambda. And so Lambda's been around for about 10 years now, but one of the things that's nice about Lambda is that it's what's called a quote unquote serverless type of solution. And technically, a lot of these like Vercel and Heroku are technically serverless, because you're not really worried about configuring or setting up a server. It's like you just write your application, you deploy it, and you let the host worry about whether or not things are working or running properly on the server. And so that kind of brings us to Amplify. So I got curious about Amplify because I started working on a side project that used Amplify as basically the back end solution. So what exactly is Amplify? Well, Amplify essentially lets you bundle a bunch of different AWS services into one like parent service. Is the best way to think of it. And so much like app services in Azure and Heroku, one of the things you can do is you can just kind of like create your web app and deploy it to Amplify, and I'll let you deploy your application to AWS. But the other thing that's really cool about this is it lets you automate your back end. So I don't know how many people here are familiar with Firebase as an example. Firebase is a Google hosting solution, and one of the things that's nice about it is they have this whole concept of, the Firebase technically is a database that you could incorporate into your front end applications, and so they have modules or APIs that you can use to work with that data, and then you can just kind of make that's how you interact or you store stuff, or persist things, is just using their database. Well, Amplify actually has similar type of functionality. So one of the things that you can do is you can kind of define data services. You can define functions like we were talking about with Lambda. Lambda essentially lets you write a function and host a function. And they also offer mobile support. So right now, Amplify, I'd say, is probably geared more towards web and mobile type of hosting solutions. And like Azure App Services, for example, is a little bit more encompassing than that. But the advantage here is that you're running everything inside of the AWS infrastructure. So to get started, you have to have a AWS account, and they do have a free tier. So if you've never set up or done AWS before, you can create an account on AWS, and there's a lot of stuff that you can do right off the bat that's not going to cost you a lot of money. They're using the LTS version of Node.js. So that's Node 20 right now. Later on this year, Node 22 will be coming out, and they're usually pretty quick about updating the service to add support for that. They also have a CLI tool, and they also have a web app that you can use called Amplify Studio, which I'll be showing here in a second. So as far as the supported frameworks and SDKs go, they support JavaScript on the front end. They also support React Native. They support Flutter, which is good because I'm not even sure if Google's supporting Flutter at this point. They support iOS, and they also support Android, both with Java and Kotlin. So as far as the front-end frameworks they have support right off the bat for React and Vue, I believe Svelte as well, AngularJS, or I should say, sorry, Angular, and Next.js. So that's kind of a big deal because like one of the things that Vercel did. Vercel is actually the company that's responsible for Next.js, and so Next.js was kind of famous for being very easy to deploy in Vercel, but very difficult to deploy in other environments. Well, AWS is kind of taking care of that, so it's pretty trivial to deploy a Next.js app on AWS. So they do have really kind of two pricing tiers. So you can try Amplify for free for up to 12 months. The free tier includes 1,000 build minutes per month, which is pretty good, and 5 gigabytes of storage. You can also transfer out as much as 15 gigabytes per month. It'll let you go up to 500,000 requests per month. And then after 12 months, build time will cost you a cent per minute, 1 cent per minute. And then their storage fee is 2.3 cents per gigabyte per month, and then 15 cents per gigabyte served. And then it's 30 cents per million requests. So AWS is always very interesting with the pricing. A lot of times when you look at the pricing, it's like, oh, that doesn't seem that bad and stuff like that. But then when you add all the different things they charge for, it can actually start to get expensive for a while. But they do have a pricing calculator that you can use. And one of the things that I just took a look, and just in general, like if you're trying to host like a application container on DigitalOcean as an example, about the cheapest you can do that's about $5 a month. And I think this, with everything, with the paid tier, the same solution would wind up costing you about $8 a month. So it's really not that much more expensive than using an app service like that, but you get the advantage of being able to take advantage of all the different AWS services as well. So one of those services is what they call Amplified Data. And Amplified Data is essentially behind the scenes, you're using DynamoDB. So DynamoDB is a database solution that Amazon provides through AWS. I believe Netflix uses it. It's a very popular database service. It's proprietary to AWS, but one of the things they've done is they've kind of abstracted out and made it very easy to do to essentially use that as like a back-end persistent storage. And they have support for both the REST API and the GraphQL API. So if you prefer to use GraphQL, you can use that. And one of the things you can also do is you can design relationships between types. So if you're defining, let's say, a user type, and then you have user may have, let's say, like multiple orders as an example, you can design one-to-many relationships or one-to-one relationships. So a lot of the same stuff you would do with a relational database, you can do with their data service as well. Amplify storage. So think S3. So S3 is kind of like the way that you store files or blobs on the back end with Amazon. You can even specify buckets that you want to use for that, and then you can configure permissions just like you would with S3. So it all pretty much works the same, but it's a built-in service with Amplify. Amplify Identity. This is using AWS Cognito behind the scenes, and Cognito is essentially their authentication service they provide. And one of the things I like about this is that it removes a lot of the work So anybody that's had to build an authentication service or an authentication API into their application, I remember back in the good old days when doing authentication service was as simple as writing a wrapper around a user or login table where the user, you'd have one column for the username and then another column for the password unencrypted. And then, you just, somebody logged in, you just check to make sure that the password, it was pretty simple back then. But nowadays, you've got two-factor authentication, you've got, support for OAuth, you also have federated login providers. Authentication's gotten very complex and just in the last, 10 or 15 years. And so there's also, rules that a lot of people like to set up as far as like how complex they want to make passwords. And so one of the things that's nice, if you're using a service like Cognito, it's like you get to take advantage of all that stuff right off the bat. And they even have it set up so that, when you're building your applications, they have very simple frameworks that you can use in order to take advantage of that. I mentioned Lambda functions before. So this is their AWS's first serverless type of feature. And so one of the things you can do is you can add a Lambda function into your project, and it'll just deploy as a Lambda service when you go to push out your application. This is very handy for applications that are like more like front-end only applications. If you think like a basic like static like React app as an example. You may have something that you want to be able to call back into. And so you can use Lambda functions for doing that. It's also, if you have something where you need to have a callback URL or a webhook or something like that, you can also do that using Lambda functions. Another feature that's kind of neat is CDK. So CDK, it's not something I'm totally familiar with, still not horribly familiar with, but CDK basically is a service that AWS provides where you can do infrastructure as code. So think CloudFormation is an example of that. But the idea here is that you can define what you want your infrastructure to look like with code. And then when you go to deploy the application, it will make sure that all these resources get deployed when you go to deploy your application. And you can simply say, Amplify add custom, and it will let you add configuration into your application. They have a CLI, which is pretty easy to install. It's just a matter of doing an npm install -g for global, and then at AWS Amplify /CLI. And some of the common commands there, Amplify Init will let you create a brand new Amplify project. So if you have an existing web app and you want to make it something that you can deploy to AWS Amplify, you can just amplify Init into the root of the folder. If you need to kind of configure the application as far as like making sure that your system is authenticated to be able to work with AWS. So it does have to do some communication between the cloud and your local machine when you're doing your development. And that's so you can use these next two commands, which are the amplify push and amplify pull. So for instance, like you can define like a data source or a data type or whatever in your application and do amplify push, and it will push that configuration up to AWS. And then if you do something on the back end first, but then you want to make that available in the front end, you can do an amplify pull, and it'll pull those resources and stuff down into the project. They also have some pretty neat UI features as well. So one of the things they do is that they have a UI library for React that you can use. So that's pretty handy. So like one of the examples I'm going to show tonight is a kind of a built-in authentication form. So you can use like a very simple hook in React, and it will it'll produce all of the UI for logging in, logging out automatically using their kind of built-in UI stuff. You can also generate stuff using the UI features. So There's also a form generation tool that you can use. So if you've designed like an object and then you want to create a form, this is always something that's kind of a pain. It's like, okay, you have this data source. Now you want to have somebody be able to edit data in that data source. You've got to build the form, you've got to build all the validation. They have a tool that will do that for you. But one of the really cool features is they have Figma integration. And so I don't know how many people here work with Figma or are familiar with Figma. Yeah. So I'm not so sure when the transition happened. I first noticed it about 2 years ago at a company I was working at. Like the designers were using Figma for everything, like all the web design, all the mobile design, they're doing everything in Figma. And Figma is interesting because it's a completely, web-based, cloud-based tool. But one of the things that's really nice about that tool is that you can essentially create a design system and then create, themes and styles and stuff that you can use inside of your web and your mobile applications. And if you're using it correctly, it's just as simple as saying, I want to apply, this theme to this component, and then everything will just, render out nice. So one of the things that's cool about Amplify is they have Figma integration built into the tool. So you can actually, if you have a designer that's designed a component, and then you will make that component available inside of your application, it'll actually will sync up with Figma. I am still a novice when it comes to Figma. So I know enough to be dangerous. Like I can go in and figure out what color something is, or what font size, or how large a button's supposed to be. But it's like, as far as like configuring all this stuff, it's like I'm still pretty new with the Figma. But one of the designers I worked with a couple jobs ago, I was telling her that it's like, oh, I use Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator, and she thought that's so quaint. It's like no, it's like she was really upset because the news had come out that Adobe was going to buy Figma for like $20 billion. That deal fell through, by the way, but it's like she was so upset because she felt that Adobe was going to come in and ruin Figma, but it didn't happen. So, and something else, they do have a new Gen 2 based tool which supports form creation based on the model. That feature is part of Gen 2. So they also have a web-based Amplify Studio, and this lets you kind of configure your storage, your identity, your models and stuff like that. It can all be done through a web UI, which is kind of nice. And this is what it looks like. Try to move my hold on. Yeah, hold on a second. I want to minimize this. There we go. Yes. That's one of the pain points with working with AWS is that it'll look like AWS. So I think that they definitely have some pain points around their user interface and stuff like that, but this is actually, it's not too bad what they have set up here. But this is kind of like what it looks like when you first log into Amplify Studio, and I'll show a demo of this tonight. If you want to say do some data modeling, what's cool about this is that you can come right into here and you can define a data type. You can specify what fields and stuff you want to have. You can add relationships to it. So it's very handy. It's like in lieu of having like a database designer, this is actually not that bad of a tool. So one of the things they just released, I think into last year, was Gen 2. So the previous tool, like they had different versions, like they'd gone up to like version 6 of the previous tool. So they even had they have instructions on there. You'll see stuff like if you're trying to go from 5 to 6, this is how you do it. Gen 2 is a completely brand new tool. The thing that's cool about it is everything can actually be developed locally now. So it used to be that there's always some back and forth where you had to do some stuff with AWS and you had to do stuff locally. Now you can kind of design all your data and everything locally and just push it up to AWS. So you don't have to do anything with their studio if you don't want to. Another feature is kind of cool is they have server-side rendering support, and so this has been kind of a big deal in the React community because with the upcoming version of React, it's a official like specification. React for a while has had a way that you could render stuff, on the server, and then which saves you don't have to worry about rendering everything on the client. They just added support for some others like Nuxt. So Nuxt now has SSR support as well. That's I believe that's the Vue-based framework that's similar to the Next. But they have a way that you can configure pretty much any JavaScript framework to where you can do server-side rendering in whatever the framework of your choice. So that's kind of cool. But the first one they supported was Next.js. They also have Git integration, which is kind of important. So one of the things that you can do is if you're using Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab or their own code commit, you can set it up so that you have the source code for your application, and then what you do is you just when you're going to create a new Amplify application, you say, "Here's the repository for my application," and then every time you do a check-in, you can set it up so that it will do a build or automate the build. They do have support for monorepos, so if you're using something like Turbo Repo, that's supported as well. And they also have automatic redeploys that's part of that. But I think a lot of companies, I haven't looked too deeply into like the whole pipeline aspect. I know some of the companies I worked at, we've had these kind of pipelines where before something could get deployed, you had to go through some rigmarole before stuff got deployed. But every company is different about the way they like to deploy applications. Some like to have like a nightly build where they'll build stuff. Some have to go through like an approval process. It's different for every company, but you can do all this with Amplify. So with that, let's do a quick demo. So I think I have opened up here. Okay, so here we go. So I'm gonna come right here. I have an application here that I went ahead and created. And one of the things that's nice about this is on top of supporting web apps, they also have really good support for mobile applications. And so up until a week ago, I was kind of exclusively a mobile developer. So one of the things I went ahead and did here is I have a project here. Let me see if I can open it up. Yeah, so I'm gonna do this. And we go into this WhatsApp folder. I'll open this up here. All right. And it just want me to upgrade everything. So this application, one of the things you'll notice here is that when you go and look at the source here, I have a regular source directory that's in here. But on top of that, I also have this Amplify directory. And so when you go to initialize an application to use Amplify, it will create this folder in here. And this folder can have different subdirectories in here, but they have a backend folder. And so if we go and we take a look at this, we'll see that there's an auth folder in here, which has got some build, some configuration stuff. And there's also one here for the API. So you can come in here, you can take a look at this. A lot of this is just configuration stuff. But one of the things that's cool is they have this GraphQL schema. So with this sample app that I did, this is just a to-do app. You can see where it has a definition here for the model. And then if I come back into here and let's take a look at the content. So go to data model. There we go. So here's the data model right here. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is, let me see if I can I'm gonna kill this app. kill this. All right, I'm just gonna remove that. All right. So if we come back here into the source code, I'm gonna come out here and take a look at the source of the application. This application is very simple. This is a very simple React Native app. And one of the things you'll see here is that I've got this one library that I'm bringing in here that's importing in the AWS Amplify API. And then I have some stuff that I'm importing in that's React Native specific. But one of the key things here you'll see is that there's this Amplify config. And this is pointing to a configuration file. And this basically has all the settings and everything that we need in order to connect with Amplify in it. And so the other thing that I have in here, if we look, is in the AWS Amplify UI React Native, they have these hooks in here for with Authenticator and use Authenticator. So if we go and we look at the root of the application here, one of the things that we will see, I've got a sign out button right here. But if we go right here to the default for the application, we can see that it's wrapped with this this hook, this with Authenticator hook. And so what this is going to do is this is going to do all the magic for making sure that the user is authenticated against the app before you can even start using the application. So let me see if I can't run that. So I'm going to come right here. I am going to run this, and I believe I have Metro running here. So yeah, there we go. So I come right here, boom, I'm presented with a login screen. So I'm going to try to log in. So, and by the way, if I wanted to, if I didn't have a account already, I can go over here and hit create account, and it'll let me kind of create account, and it will send me an email to verify that I am who I am. So a lot of this stuff is baked in, it's been thought of. You can also tie in phone numbers and do SMS, like security codes through SMS as well. You can do all this stuff with their Cognito services. It's all baked in. So you can even reskin this. If you don't like the design, you want to do something completely different, you can also replace it with your own UI if you want to. So I'm going to try to log in here. And we'll see if I remember my password. All right, and let's do a sign in. Voila. Okay, so now I'm signed in. And so I can come over here and I can do a to-do. So I'm going to say meetup, go JaxNode meetup. And there I just created a to-do item. So I believe now I should be able to go back to AWS here. And if I go to data, visual. Well, it's going to be, I was just thinking that the content should be able to go to, I'm trying to remember which tab it is. But yeah, we can go to storage, and we can see here that it's got a bucket for storing stuff here. We can also come over here and we can look at our authentication, and it'll show us the, I'm in the right application, yeah. So I'm in the WhatsApp. So you can take a look at that as well. But something else that you can also do here is if you have a web application, let me go back out. Let's see here, staging. This down here is a little bit easier to see. So I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna go to all apps. So I have a couple different apps that I have set up here. One of the things I did was I took an example application. They have a Amplify Vite React template that you can use. And this is something where I just, very simply went in and just kind of use that template to scaffold out a new React application. So if I come here, let me go ahead and kill this. And let's do, yeah, amount. And I think it was this React byte. The application called Amplify byte. So let's do this CD. There we go. All right. So this is a kind of a basic template they have. And if we come right here, we can see that I've got, this is just a simple React application. And it also has a Amplify backend here. As right now, I don't have auth set up for this, but I do have data. And this is actually using the Gen 2. So one thing that's interesting here is that I've essentially come through here. I have a model that's it's all designed here inside of the resource. So you if you want to, you can come here. You can add additional fields to this and do Amplify push, and it will add those fields and stuff up to AWS. So let me try. Actually, this is already running, or is it? I think this is running. Yeah, I think this is running. Let's see if that's running. So let's come back here. And we go localhost, or maybe it's not running, or it's probably running on a different URL. So let me actually kill that. And over here, I'm gonna say dev byte. And so what's cool about this is that I can still run all this stuff locally. So like command click, there we go. Voila. So here's that the application here. And so I come over here, I can add a new to-do, say, all right. And then boom, it adds that right there. And then if I want to get rid of them, I can simply tap on one of these and it will delete the old to-dos. So that's pretty much it. And then on Amplify, if I come back here, one of the things I can do is once I've deployed the application, I actually can come over here, tap on that, and now I can see the same thing, but basically in a hosted URL. Yes.
You show the connectivity with Git backend, but that's for what you have in your project. What happens to the studio interface settings that you're showing? How are those communicated to a repository? Let's say you're working not solo, but with a team.
Yes.
So that studio interface that you showed, how is that shared across different members of a team to work on?
Sure. So do you remember like where I showed the Amplify folder before?
Yes.
So one of the things you can do is you can set up in your gitignore file to completely ignore that folder. And then what you can do is you can do a git pull. I'm sorry, not a git pull, a Amplify pull, right? Once you have it configured, you can pull down the Amplify folder and it'll pull down all those resources. So for instance, if I come back here, I've got this running, so I can do Amplify pull. And this will actually go back and pull all those resources down. So, and of course, it doesn't remember, it doesn't have the profile. So that's something that's going to fix. But if you have the profile set up, then what it'll do is it will automatically go and pull the resources down. Another way you can do this is you can use access keys. So for instance, if I come back out here.
But that's going from AWS.
Correct.
Environment into your local.
Correct.
It's not like you're using Git for all the configuration of the studio.
That's correct.
So if you have a team of developers that need to work different features and they're time staggered in your timeline to deploy them, how do you work that out?
So the way you'd work that out is you can actually set up multiple environments. So one of the examples they give is that right now I have like a staging environment, but I could do a David environment. I could also do a Sydney environment so that, you know, if you're working on special features and stuff, you could create a branch, you can have your own environment and then work on those features so you don't have to worry about it interfering with the work of your other teammates.
how's that shown on that Amplify Studio interface?
Sure. So if we come back to Amplify,
If you didn't go in that direction, it's okay not to.
it's fine. So for instance, if I come back here, and I'll see if I can remember where this is. So right here, we see we've got the main deployment branch. And they literally changed the UI for this just over the last.
It says add branch at the bottom.
Yes, so you can add additional branches, but see if I can find, let me find the older one, because we come over here to this one right here as an example. You can see that this has got a environment here that you can set up here. So this is set up for staging, and if we want to, we can come in here, we can manage the environments. And we can create here it is, this is kind of like the old looking UI here. If we want, we can create a new environment. And let's see here. I can just say clone and I'll create a new environment. Does that answer your question?
Could you go back to the UI that actually says AWS Amplify Studio?
Yes.
There.
Yes.
So that's where you configure stuff. How's the stuff that's on this whole page captured? Where is that captured? Is that an environment? Is that in a special Amplify folder in your project?
There's a configuration file.
Yeah.
And then so if I do like an Amplify pull, it will take the configuration from this and pull it down into my local.
Also, this is the stuff that gets pulled down. What's on this page gets pulled
Mhm.
down.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. Let's see here. So what are some of the alternatives to Amplify? So I mentioned Firebase before. So Firebase has been around for a while. It's very popular with a lot of front-end developers. I don't know if it has all the bells and whistles that the AWS has, but I think that's one of the areas I think Google's actually done. There's a couple solutions that Google has that I think are kind of nice. One of the things I talked about last night was they have a feature called the Colab, where if you were trying to do like machine learning, do a lot of crunching of data and stuff like that. They have an environment that basically works like a interactive Python notebook, and then you can kind of connect it to Google and do that. So I think Google does have some good hosting solutions as well. But one of the things that's nice about Amplify is that you get access to all the other AWS services, and they tend to be on the forefront of whatever's going in the cloud hosting space. From just about everybody I've talked to, AWS is really, when it comes to like actually deploying stuff to the cloud, AWS comes in as less expensive than Azure or some of the other big hosting environments. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but I remember a couple of years ago talking to people, and they're saying, yeah, it's like they're really the kind of the best deal in town. So AWS is it's kind of like or at least Amplify is kind of like crack. Like that was the story I always heard as a kid. It's like drug dealers, they give you the drugs for free the first time, get you hooked on them and stuff like that, and then they start charging for you. So that's pretty much how these cloud hosting providers are operating now. It's like, oh, we have this free hosting tier and stuff like that. So you get in, you get hooked, and then they start charging you. So that's pretty much the way it works here as well. And let me see, I have one more slide. Any questions? Yes, Michael.
In your demo, how do you view your pricing and the bill you're gonna get?
Yes. So
if you're able to show it, we want you to show it.
no, it's okay. I'm trying to think if it's okay for me to show this. They have a tool on here. Maybe I should just do this. So AWS pricing calculator.
Yeah, but that tells you like an estimate of like based off numbers you crunch in, but it's not like the true, like, what is your project actually running you?
Yeah.
I bring it up because I used Amplify like many years ago. And
Uh-huh.
I ended up not knowing what I was doing, and then bill for $200 came in the mail, and because I left some database backups running.
Yes. So this is the thing to remember about cloud hosting. So there was jokes about this on the show Silicon Valley. It's like, oh, we got this out, all of a sudden we got some traffic, we got this outrageous, AWS bill. So one of the things to think about when developing for the cloud is that you're paying for memory, you're paying for storage, you're paying for CPU cycles, you're paying for requests. It's like, when you just look at the individual things, they don't look that expensive, but then when you add everything together, and get expensive. And so Jason Gerard, who's technically the co-organizer for this group, when he started working at Rander, their goal was to deploy all of their microservices essentially as just Node.js services. And one of the things they found was they were developing their services is that, they had this one service as an example that was taking up 50 megabytes of memory, right? Well, over time on AWS, if you have that, cloned out over, multiple different, let's say Kubernetes nodes, they can get pretty expensive. And so one of the engineers there took that same service and rewrote it in Golang as opposed to Node.js and got the memory down to 2 megabytes per service, right? So there's always this argument against premature optimization. But if you're using, let's say, Elixir as an example, well, Elixir is probably going to be a lot more efficient than for like a backend service than trying to use Node.js as an example. So when you're designing applications, building applications for the cloud, and that you're going to be getting a lot of traffic, I always try to do what I call value engineering in my head. So I always try to make sure that, okay, I want to write this so it's fairly simple to write and deploy, but I also don't want to get a $200 a month, AWS bill. And so I had Microsoft had this program years ago called, trying to remember, maybe somebody here remembers what the program is called, but they had a thing where you could sign up as like a small business or whatever with Azure, and they provided like so many free like Azure minutes a month or something like that, like 200. Yeah, I think it was a Spark plan. Yeah. And that was kind of service. And I think it was for like, I'm trying to remember if it was like 18 months or something like that. And I remember I signed up for that, and it was great because I was hosting all this stuff and I really wasn't, paying for anything because it all came in under my allocated minutes per month. And then after the 18 minutes go by, I get my credit card bill. I'm like, what's this charge on here? Because there was something that I'd left running and stuff on there. And so it's one of the things you have to take into account when you're designing stuff. If the cost is a concern, there's different ways you can engineer that. A lot of companies, that's why a lot of companies like doing co-location, because they know that they're going to have to pay for that rack space and they're going to have to pay for the internet access, but the CPU cycles, if they already own the hardware, they're not having to pay for that. They just have to pay for the electricity. So yeah, that's something to take into account.
So Amplify doesn't have a tab for billing. I saw that they had an insights tab, but I guess you have to go through the normal AWS, like look at your bill per region. Because like even AWS's page, they won't give you billing for all regions. They're like notorious about being bad about that. Like,
yeah.
If you put something in Ohio and you do most stuff in Northeast and not Ohio region,
Yeah,
you'll never see the bill. Like you have to click through every single region.
yeah. So it's also something too, because you do want to have reliability built into whatever you're trying to build. So you want to be able to make sure that if this data center goes down over here, that you have something ready to go over here. And so I remember one of the companies that I worked at, we had a couple data centers that we used in the United States, but we also had one in Australia. So if everything got knocked out here, we would still be able to provide service based off the data center that we had in Australia. And I think Azure, the way that they're set up, like if you're using their app service provider, that they have like a ready to go backup in case that service fails, but then they also have another backup in another data center. So if the whole data center goes down, you're still up and running. You just get, the traffic gets just redirected to that new data center. All right.
Question on the,
Yeah,
you're showing the login
yes.
modules. Is that like a specific Amplify thing, and so do they provide like other like screens or modules for like?
Yeah, so I'm using the built-in screens they provide, but you can completely do those on your own. You don't have to use that at all. So I haven't looked at the doc specifically about how you implement that, but it's a really nice thing. If you're trying to essentially throw something together really quick, you say, I want to have, show authentication. This is great for prototyping stuff. So, you can set up, these are the different, REST APIs that I need. This is, I need to have a login and stuff like that. It's like, I literally did no work to implement that. And so that's what's kind of cool about that, is that I can just use that. But if you want to design like your own like UI and stuff like that, you can completely replace it with your own UI.
Is the Federation one included in there too?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm not sure how you configure that, but yeah, that's all part of Cognito. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And thank everybody for coming out tonight.
Need to stop the recording.
I was gonna go ahead and stop the recording. Or try to remember. Yes, yes, yeah. There we go. Stop recording.